August 19, 1944. Near Chartres, France. Omar Bradley is bent over a map table, checking the line George Patton was supposed to hold: Dreux, Chartres, Orleans. The canvas walls of the headquarters tent shake in the wind. Staff officers wait in silence. Then, a liaison officer pushes through the flap with a fresh report from the front. Patton's lead troops are already at the Seine, not approaching it, not probing toward it, at it. Bradley looks up. For a moment, nobody in the tent speaks. The map in front of him is already wrong. Before we go any further, subscribe to WWII Warmind, like this video, and tell me in the comments which World War II commander you want us to cover next, because this is one of those moments where the war stops looking orderly and starts moving at the speed of one man's nerve. Bradley takes the paper, reads it once, then reads it again. He was supposed to hold at Dreux and Chartres. A colonel beside him answers carefully. Sir, XV Corps reached Mantes-Gassicourt yesterday. During the night, men of the 313th Infantry crossed in torrential rain. Bradley does not look up. Crossed what? The Seine, sir. Now Bradley does look up. That's impossible. The colonel swallows. Apparently not, sir. And that was the problem with Patton in August of 1944. The impossible kept arriving in writing. This was not some minor overstatement from an overeager staff officer. By this point, Patton's army had been racing so hard across France that entire map sheets were becoming obsolete almost as soon as they were unfolded. Patton himself had written earlier in the month that he whooped with joy every time his columns ran off one map and had to use the next in series. That was not a metaphor. That was his idea of a good day. Bradley bends over the table. Show me. An officer traces the route with a pencil. Lorient to Venmes, then eastward pressure. XV Corps to Mantes-Gassicourt on the 18th. Other spearheads moving toward Melun, Fontainebleau, and Montereau. 4th Armored already lunging toward Sens. Bradley's face tightens. How fast? Combat Command B made roughly 250 miles in 34 hours. There is another silence. 250 miles in 34 hours. In wartime. Through traffic, confusion, uncertain enemy positions, darkness, refueling, maintenance halts, and the general disorder of a fast-moving front. Not in theory. Not in an exercise. In France. Against a retreating but still dangerous enemy. Bradley stares at the line again. That was the limit. The officer answers quietly. It was, sir. Bradley folds the paper once. Then, he hasn't just outrun the Germans. He's outrun permission. That was the heart of the matter. Patton was not only moving faster than German resistance could stabilize, he was moving faster than Allied command arrangements could contain him. And Bradley knew exactly what that meant. Speed on that scale was not just impressive, it was dangerous. A commander who moved too slowly missed victory. A commander who moved too fast could tear his own army away from its fuel, its flanks, and its orders. A younger officer, too junior to hide his anxiety, asks, "Do you want a signal sent to 3rd Army, sir?" Bradley answers without looking up. "No, I'll speak to him myself." Somewhere ahead, Patton is in his natural habitat. Motion, pressure, decision, risk. Bradley is carrying something heavier. He is not commanding a single thrust. He is thinking about the whole army group, the British to the north, the Falaise pocket, the open flanks, the supply system, the roads, the bridgeheads, the fuel allocations, and the possibility that one subordinate's success may create a larger crisis for everyone else. Bradley turns away from the map table. "Get the car ready." The officers step aside. One of them says under his breath, "Sir, he's already there." Bradley hears it. "Yes," he says. That is exactly the trouble. When Bradley arrives at Patton's headquarters, the atmosphere turns cold before a word is spoken. This is not a routine conference. This is a superior commander coming forward, because paper orders and telephone traffic have already proven too slow for what Patton is doing. Patton steps forward first, impatient, alert, almost energized by the chaos he has caused. "Brad?" Bradley answers with less warmth. "George." The staff senses what is coming and quietly finds reasons to disappear to the edges of the tent. Bradley opens at once. "We had an understanding. 3rd Army was not to go beyond Dreux, Chartres, and toward the Seine." Patton replies instantly. "And yet we are there." "That is the point. The enemy is broken. The enemy is retreating," Bradley says. That is not the same thing. Patton walks to the map. He is disorganized. His crossings are vulnerable. His road network is clogged. If we stop now, we give him time. Bradley steps closer. If you do not stop, you may give him something better. Your own overextension. Patton turns back to him. You do not win a pursuit by acting as though every mile is a peacetime maneuver. And you do not command an army group, Bradley says, by pretending supply lines do not exist. That was always the divide between them. Patton thought in motion. Bradley thought in structure. Patton saw opportunity in every gap. Bradley saw a responsibility to the entire front. Patton points to the Seine line. The crossings are there. The Germans are off balance. Momentum is the one thing they cannot answer if we keep it. Bradley answers. Fool can answer it. Flanks can answer it. Bridges can answer it. Congestion can answer it. A broken plan can answer it. Patton gives him that hard, unblinking stare that subordinates knew so well. Ground once taken should not be handed back because headquarters has become nervous. Bradley's voice hardens. This is not nerves. This is command. And that word matters. Because Bradley was not being timid. He was managing scale. He was the man who had to think about what happened, not only if Patton succeeded, but if he went one step too far and found himself hanging beyond support with an enemy still capable of striking a weak flank or blowing a bridge at the wrong time. Patton presses on anyway. Did you ever know me to give up a piece of ground once I had taken it? Bradley answers, no. But this is different. I can hold it. Can you fuel it? If I am given the gasoline, I can go anywhere I want. Bradley lets that line sit there, because both men know it is true and not true at the same time. Patton can go anywhere he wants, only if an army of truck drivers, engineers, mechanics, military police, and supply officers can somehow keep the machine alive behind him. The most vivid surviving account of this confrontation says Bradley arrived fit to be tied. It also preserves the substance of Patton's rough response, that he had already been to the Seine that morning and was not about to pretend otherwise. In cleaner language, his meaning was simple. I am already there. What do you want me to do? Pull back just to make the paperwork look tidy? Bradley finally exhales. His anger has not gone away, but it has settled into something more complicated, because the infuriating truth is that Patton is getting results. Then Bradley says the line that reveals everything about this moment. It certainly is a pleasure to talk to someone who is sure and confident, but for my sake, stay put there now. Don't advance any further across the river. That was what Omar Bradley said when Patton pushed his lead tanks across France, outran his own maps, and refused to wait for permission. And what makes that line so powerful is that it is neither a compliment nor a rebuke alone. It is a superior officer acknowledging a subordinate who is reckless, exhausting, difficult, and, at that moment, producing exactly the kind of battlefield effect everyone had hoped for and almost no one could fully control. Patton hears the words. Whether he absorbs the caution is another question, because by the time Bradley is trying to slow him down, Patton's army is already beginning to suffer from the one enemy that always catches even the fastest advance: distance. The first sign that Third Army had moved too fast was not a line of German tanks. It was gasoline. That is one of the great ironies of the summer of 1944. Patton's columns did not first strike a wall of organized resistance. They struck arithmetic, daily burn rates, ton requirements, road congestion, truck turnaround times, the blunt mechanical question of whether a famous armored pursuit could continue one more day. Patton later wrote to his son with remarkable clarity, "My chief difficulty is not the Germans but gasoline. If they would give me enough gas, I could go anywhere I want." That line captures the whole campaign. Brilliance at the front, anxiety in the rear, tanks ready to move, fuel not ready to arrive. A supply officer enters the command post carrying the latest allocation figures. General, current allotments remain tight. Patton does not even look up. Everything remains tight. That is not news. First Army is drawing heavily as well. We are all drawing heavily. The question is, who is moving? The officer hesitates. Some at Army Group believe the pace itself is creating the crisis. Now Patton looks at him. The pace is the reason the Germans are in crisis, and again he was not entirely wrong. Official figures from the period show Patton's Third Army and Hodges's First Army together consuming around 800,000 gallons of gasoline a day on average. That is the scale of the pursuit. It is also the scale of the problem. Behind the glamour of the dash across France, another army had to come into being almost overnight. Truck drivers, route controllers, convoy officers, traffic police, depot planners. Men who would never get the myth attached to their names, but without whom the famous names stop where they stand. And that is how one of the great supply improvisations of the war took shape. The Red Ball Express. The conception was simple and desperate at the same time. Build a rolling supply artery that would move non-stop from the ports and depots forward, around the clock, using thousands of trucks, one-way routes, controlled intersections, and every ounce of urgency the system could bear. Somewhere in the supply planning chain, one officer says, "We can't sustain this indefinitely." Another answers, "We do not need indefinitely. We need now. The roads are already overworked. Then clear them. The turnaround time is too long. Then shorten it." That is not how roads work. The reply comes cold and immediate. No, but it may be how victory works. There was a line associated with the Red Ball effort that captured the mood perfectly. Let it never be said that lack of supplies stopped Patton when the Germans couldn't. That was the spirit of the whole enterprise. If the front had outrun the system, then the system would have to start running. And still the front kept moving. At Seine, Patton's pace became almost surreal. American forces hit the town so suddenly that German officers were reportedly still out in dress uniform, like men caught by a war that had arrived ahead of schedule. Imagine that morning. A German officer hears engines, not from a distance, but from inside the town's future. He turns to an aide. "What is that?" "Vehicles from the west, sir." "How many?" "I cannot tell." "Are they ours?" The answer comes in steel and dust. American tanks push in. Surprise becomes decision in a matter of moments. This was what Patton's war looked like in August 1944. Not a steady grinding pressure, but repeated shocks landing in places where the enemy was not ready, not oriented, and sometimes not even dressed for the right day. At Melun, another force tries to seize a bridge before it can be destroyed. At Fontainebleau, men work to force the river crossing under conditions no one would call orderly. At Montereau, pressure keeps building. Every few hours, another place name appears in the reports. Every few hours, the map is revised. Every few hours, the clean line in the commander's head looks less like reality. Back at higher headquarters, the pile of messages gets taller. Mantes-Gassicourt reached. Bridge activity at Melun, 4th Armored toward Seine. Fontainebleau crossing effort underway. Montereau threatened. One exhausted officer mutters, "By the time we update the map, Patton is already beyond it." No one laughs. It is not a joke. It is an operations summary. Even on Patton's own side, the speed is beginning to split opinion. Some commanders are exhilarated. Others are exasperated. The historical record preserves complaints about sudden and unexpected changes, about confusion caused by rapid alterations of plan, about orders that seemed senseless to tired men trying to execute them on the ground. And that too is part of the truth. Fast war looks magnificent from a distance. Inside it, it can feel like controlled instability. An operations officer asks Bradley, should Third Army be restrained more firmly? Bradley answers with the kind of realism that only senior command can afford. Only if you can tell me how to do it without surrendering the initiative. That was Patton's great leverage over the men above him. If they stopped him, they risked wasting momentum. If they did not stop him, they risked losing command of the tempo altogether. Then the reports spread even farther. Not one neat armored point, not one tidy advance arrow, but a chain of moving threats. Mantes-Gassicourt, Seine, Melun, Fontainebleau, Montereau. Then Troyes. The front is no longer a line in the familiar sense. It is a series of sudden appearances. By August 25th, elements of the 4th Armored are pushing toward the outskirts of Troyes after another long drive, charging across open ground in spread formation. That matters not just as a military detail, but as a psychological one. The Germans are no longer dealing with an opponent who politely builds pressure in one obvious sector. They are dealing with an opponent who arrives before the defense has finished, imagining where it should stand. Somewhere on the German side, a staff officer studies the reports and asks the only sensible question left. Which is the main American thrust? The reply, in effect, is devastating. At this point, all of them. This is how retreat becomes strategic danger. Not through dramatic collapse alone, but through compression of time. Units are scraped together. rearward lines are proposed. Bridges are designated. Local resistance is improvised. But before these things become stable, Patton's army is already at the next river, the next road hub, the next gap. That is why the enemy took notice of his style even when they did not indulge in hero worship. Serious German officers respected aggression when they saw it. Günther Blumentritt later said they regarded Patton extremely highly as the most aggressive panzer general of the Allies. Heinz Guderian praised the campaign from the standpoint of a tank specialist. The point was not that they feared a myth. It was that they recognized method when it was applied with force. And by late August, German command language had become blunter. Field Marshal Walter Model admitted that the Allies had attained absolute tactical superiority in mobility and weapons. Those words matter because they are the enemy's concession that the battlefield had tilted. Not in every political sense, not forever, but in the practical sense that decides whether a defense can recover in time. Absolute tactical superiority in mobility and weapons. That was what Patton was exploiting. Not speed as spectacle, speed as an instrument for denying the enemy time to reorganize. His own letter of August 21st may be the clearest expression of the philosophy behind it. He wrote that by acting in this manner, he had always gotten to the place the enemy expected him to come about 3 days before he got there. Then, after the move on Sens, he added a triumphant note: they got the bridge before the Germans blew it. That is worth a week. Worth a week. That is the language of a pursuit commander. Not geography for its own sake. Time stolen from the enemy. And now we come back to Bradley's line. Because by the middle of this story, that line means more than it did when he first said it. It certainly is a pleasure to talk to someone who is sure and confident. Taken alone, it almost sounds admiring. But for my sake, stay put there now. Don't advance any further across the river. Taken whole, it becomes something deeper. A commander's reluctant acknowledgement that certainty, in Patton's hands, had become operational force. In plain terms, Bradley was saying this: you are infuriating. You are difficult to govern. You are moving faster than I would like. But right now, your conviction is breaking the enemy faster than my caution can safely redesign the map. That is why the line survives. Because it captures a collision between two necessary forms of command. Bradley was not the cautious man versus the bold man. He was the responsible commander of the larger frame. Patton was not merely reckless. He was the attacking commander who understood that in a pursuit, hesitation restores the enemy faster than any bridge repair party ever could. Neither man was entirely sufficient without the other. Bradley's caution without Patton's pressure risks a slower exploitation. Patton's pressure without Bradley's structure risks outrunning not just the enemy, but reality itself. And in August 1944, reality was closing in through fuel. The Great Pursuit eventually slowed, not because the Germans suddenly discovered some flawless answer to American mobility, but because the Allied system reached the edge of what roads, trucks, depots, and fuel columns could support. The Red Ball Express carried immense tonnage. Drivers worked punishing runs. The delivery system stretched farther and farther. Official Army history would later describe round-trip distances for support lines of staggering length. The National WWII Museum notes about 12,000 tons delivered a day over 82 days, more than 412,000 tons carried by the end. That scale tells you two things at once. First, the Allied logistical achievement was enormous. Second, even enormous achievements strain when an army is advancing faster than almost any planner expected. So what does this moment reveal? It reveals Patton at his most characteristic, convinced that speed itself was protection, that a broken enemy should be pressed before he could think clearly again, that waiting for perfect approval was often just a cleaner way of missing the moment. It reveals Bradley in his proper light too, not timid, not plotting, but burdened with a wider field of vision than the men at the tip of the spear. He had to think about what happened after the thrill of the dash, after the bridge was taken, after the applause. He had to think about whether the structure could bear the success. And it reveals something larger about war itself, that the famous moment at the front always rests on the unromantic system behind it. Patton could outrun maps. He could even outrun permission. But he could not outrun an empty tank. Patton later wrote what may be the best summary of his own method in those days. By acting in this manner, I have always gotten to the place he expected me to come about 3 days before he got there. That is not merely a boast. It is a theory of mobile war. Arrive before expectation. Force reaction instead of meeting preparation. Make the enemy defend the wrong place because he understood the right place too late. And yet even that theory had limits. Fuel, distance, road capacity, turnaround times. The mechanics of movement always come due. That is the final dramatic truth of this episode. One of the fastest American advances of the war was shaped by two men at the top who understood different halves of victory. Patton understood how to seize the moment before it closed. Bradley understood how easily a seized moment could become an unsupported one. Between them stands one extraordinary line, half admiration and half warning, and perhaps the best single sentence ever spoken about Patton in motion. It certainly is a pleasure to talk to someone who is sure and confident. Not surrender. Not praise. Recognition. If you want more stories like this, told from the real wartime record, the memoirs, the operations reports, and the words that commanders actually left behind, subscribe to WWII Warmind, like this video, and comment below with the next World War II story you want us to cover.